Cliff Sims with Yellowhammer News. We're joined today by Senator Rand Paul here in Montgomery to speak to the Alabama Republican Party tonight. And let's just get right into it, Senator. 2016, right around the corner. You said that you're probably going to make a final decision on that in March or April. And one of the things that I've noticed is you say that the country is ready for a different kind of Republican. What do you mean by that?
You know, I think for Republicans to win, we need to be a bigger party. So I've said we got to look like the rest of America. We need to be white, black, brown, rich, poor, with tattoos, without tattoos, with earrings, with ponytails. We have to just look more like the rest of America. But that means we have to talk to and understand where people are coming from. We need to understand what problems they encounter, and then we need to have solutions for them.
Well, what are some specific issues that you feel like, it sounds like you're talking about obviously expanding the party here to get back to where we can win some of these national elections that we've struggled with as Republicans recently. What are some issues that you feel like you can hammer on that are going to allow you to expand the party in ways that other candidates won't?
First of all, I'd say Alabama's not the problem. We're doing okay in Alabama, but there are places where we're not doing okay. Even in Alabama, there are parts and cities of Alabama where we're not winning. But let's say, for example, a state like Michigan. Not only do we not win Michigan in presidential elections, in Detroit we get about 3% of the vote. So what's the big problem in Detroit? 20% unemployment, chronic poverty, chronic unemployment, black unemployment, twice white unemployment. So what are the Democrats doing? I haven't a clue. I don't know what they're doing for Detroit. But what do Republicans like myself say? I say we should dramatically lower the taxes in Detroit for 10 years. I have a plan that would leave $1.3 billion in Detroit and never send it to Washington. So I'm not going to tax Alabama to bail out Detroit, but I'm going to let Detroit bail themselves out by leaving more money in Detroit and not sending it to Washington. This is a big debate we should have. Are we better off sending money to Washington, more money, or better off sending less money to Washington? But I don't think Republicans have ever tried taking that to people who live in poverty and saying, look, Democrats have been giving you stuff on occasion, but it hasn't helped you. Are you any better off than you used to be? Whereas I think our message, if we take it to Detroit or poor areas of Chicago or Atlanta or any of the large cities, maybe those people will say, you know what, the Democrats haven't really been helping me very much.
Well, obviously expanding the party is going to be a big deal, or expanding the electorate that's willing to vote for Republicans is going to be a big deal in the general. We got to get through the primary if you were to run before that. One of the issues that a lot of the base and the conservative base is expressed some concerns about with you in the past is on foreign policy. Tell us a little bit philosophically. I hear a lot of folks say that Rand Paul is not a peace through strength guy, that you want to kind of scale us back to the point that we're maybe vulnerable.
I think probably the opposite is true. I would say that the most important thing we do in the federal government or in Washington is national defense, bar none. When I look at priorities on where money would be spent, I would spend it to defend the country, without question. If we're looking at budgets, I produced several 5-year budgets. My last 5-year budget balances in 5 years, which I think is the responsible thing to do, but actually did it while spending above the military sequester. And so when the military sequester came up, I actually voted against the military sequester. One of my heroes is Ronald Reagan. I absolutely do believe in peace through strength. Where some people get confused when they are thinking about who I am is that I'd say there's a spectrum of foreign policy. One is that we're nowhere any of the time, and that would be isolationism. But the other extreme is that we're everywhere all the time. And I think everywhere all the time leads sometimes to unintended consequences. So for example, Hillary's war in Libya, I think has made us less safe. It's allowed for jihadism to spread throughout Libya. And I feel that we are more at risk of America now than we were before the war. So I think it was a mistake to get involved in that war. The one true thing in the Middle East is every time we have toppled a secular dictator, we've gotten the rise of chaos and the rise of radical Islam.
Well, let's talk about some of that radical Islam specifically when it comes to ISIS. The president's got the resolution that he's sent over to you guys to authorize the use of force there, and he's attached some unprecedented qualifications to that. And I was curious how you would handle ISIS particularly different if you were the president, commander-in-chief right now.
Had I been president last summer when ISIS became a threat, I would have gone before the joint session of Congress. I would have laid out the case, why military might was necessary to stop them, what American interests were involved or endangered, and I would have asked for permission from Congress. The Constitution is explicit. Congress decides when we initiate war, the president executes war. So for the last 5 or 6 months, while I agree with military action, The way the president has done it is a lawless and unconstitutional way. It's exactly what he's doing with immigration. It's the same that he did with amending Obamacare on his own. It's his usurping power that by the Constitution belongs to the people and Congress, but doesn't belong to the president.
Speaking of the president, this morning he was talking about you, and he called you an interesting guy. That was the phrase he used. Don't know what the connotation
was there. It could be worse.
Was there.
It could be worse.
Very true.
Could be worse.
Well, maybe we'll play a little word association game here. So I'm gonna say, I'll say somebody, take the president, give me a few words or phrase how you feel about those folks. How about President Obama?
Affable.
Hillary Clinton.
Wrong.
All right. How about Jeb Bush?
Yesterday.
How about Scott Walker?
Not bad.
All right, one more question for you. Auditing the Fed. This has been something that has been a priority it was a priority of your father's, it has been a priority of yours. Not exactly something that Janet Yellen has a warm and fuzzy feeling about.
Surprise, surprise.
Our senator here, Senator Shelby, now on the banking committee, it's something that he's expressed a desire to take a look at. Why is it so important to audit the Fed?
The Federal Reserve has $4.5 trillion worth of assets. And you might say, well, gosh, that's great. They own a lot of stuff. Well, the way they buy stuff is they create a computer entry that says, oh, we're purchasing this. My question is, who did they buy it from? So, for example, we had this big crisis and all these mortgages went bad. The Federal Reserve now owns mortgages. Do we know if they're good or bad? Do we know if they're worth 100% of value or 50% of value? Do we know if they bought distressed assets from people they knew? What if you're the chairman of the Federal Reserve and you bought your brother's bank? Shouldn't we know that? There's a revolving door between the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and Wall Street. If people lose money by making bad decisions, they should suffer the consequences. If anybody in Alabama owns a gas station, a Walmart, a Walgreens, and they go bankrupt, nobody bails them out. Is there any reason why people who make $100 million a year make bad decisions should then be bailed out, and then they're not even going to tell us who they bailed out or how much money they spent? All we're asking for is transparency. But I'll tell you what's particularly galling is that the Federal Reserve is given a monopoly to print money, create money out of thin air, and then they're using that enormous power to lobby against legislation. It ought to be illegal for them to be lobbying against legislation. They're a creature of Congress. They ought to be quiet and they ought to accept oversight, and the Congress should be offended by an agency they created telling them not to look at their books.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.